this week. However, you've all given me so much content that I have basically weeks and weeks of videos ahead, and I'm excited for quite a few of them, so I'm just throwing them in right now. Why not? And this one subscriber has been so persistent that if I ignored her for another week, I'd feel guilty. Her choices were all so bomb, so I went through them and took what I found the most interesting of the bunch. And as you can tell from today's title, we will be going over the Anthrax killings from 2001, as requested by Jennifer Hoffman. Thanks, Jen. Now, the events that we'll be going over did take place about 1 week after September 11th. And if you watched my very first video, when I actually was talking about 9/11, I'd received quite a bit of weird feedback. One of them was literally someone telling me to say hi to Bin Laden when I meet him in hell. So I'm nervous for your comments on this one. Know that I mean no disrespect at all when making these videos remotely, even though I enjoy them and have fun making them and editing and maybe go a little bit wild Matt sometime. I mean, no disrespect to anyone involved. Now, with that being said, let's get started. Get yourselves nice and comfortable. Find a safe place to relax and calm your minds. Grab yourselves a nice treat, a beverage, a glass of wine, some frosted flakes, whatever you'd like, and let's get ready to dive into the events that took place back in September of 2001. The United States was suffering from a series of coordinated terrorist attacks orchestrated by the terrorist group Al-Qaeda on September 11th. I'm not sure it's Al-Qaeda or Al-Qaeda. Qaeda or Al-Qaeda. Maybe this is why you get those negative comments, Angel. How do you pronounce Al-Qaeda? Al-Qaeda. Okay. Obviously, this was a very dark time. Honestly, everywhere. 4 airline jets had been hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center in New York City and the Pentagon in Virginia, as well as a field in rural Somerset County. It was very devastating for the whole country. And just 1 week later, with everything that was already going on, a series of new attacks that the FBI still refers to as what became the worst biological attacks in U.S. history, and ended up being one of the largest and most complex of investigations in the history of law enforcement. So buckle up, like I said. Get some wine. So after all of these events initially, you have a very torn, divided, devastated country. So how did this all start? Who would do this and why? Well, let me tell you, first of all, do you actually know what anthrax is? I know I didn't, so I'm going to be describing everything here to you. My channel is now an educational one. So anthrax is actually a very rare but serious illness. It's not actually the powder that you are coming into contact with. No, it is an illness, and it is caused by a spore-forming bacterium called Bacillus anthracis. Insert word here. The illness anthrax mainly affects livestock and wild game, but humans can become infected through direct or indirect contact with animals. However, it can also be contagious through direct contact or through contact with a contaminant object that bioterrorism, as they recognized this could easily be used against people. However, what I don't think they realized nor wanted to admit was that was exactly what was about to happen, and they were absolutely correct. So a man named Bob Stevens, whom was a photojournalist for The Sun, a subsidiary of American Media in Boca Raton, Florida, was 62 years old at the time in 2001, and he had been working for The Sun when one day a funny letterhead came into the workplace. His coworkers were kind of laughing together and discussing a love letter that had came in for Jennifer Lopez. Makes sense, bring it to The Sun. This was then brought over and opened by Bobby Bender, a news assistant, and the two, Bobby and Bob, or you could call Bob Robert, were laughing over the contents. So what they had found inside of the letter was an empty can of chewing tobacco, a small detergent carton, a cigar tube with a cheap cigar inside, a gold Star of David's charm, and a folded handwritten love letter to Jennifer Lopez that was actually covered with what looked like talcum powder. Either way, going to tell you right now, the way to a woman's heart, especially someone as incredible as Jennifer Lopez, is not by sending her trash in the mail. That's disgusting. So either way, a few people had looked at it. Of course, if something crazy like that came in the mail at your workplace, everyone would have a good laugh, right? So this was handled by both Ernest Blanco, Bob Stevens, Bobby Bender, and Roz Suss. So this funny casual workplace moment had taken place on September 4th. And well in the early morning hours of October 2nd, the photojournalist Bob, or Robert Stevens that I had mentioned, had actually arrived at a Florida hospital feverish and delirious. The emergency room doctors thought he may have been suffering from meningitis, but when that was ruled out, it was actually difficult for them to determine what might be wrong. This was until an infectious disease specialist looked into Bob's spinal fluid. Lab tests ended up confirming his suspicions, as just 2 days later, Bob Stevens was diagnosed with inhalation anthrax, which, as I have mentioned previously, is quite deadly. Now, once this was confirmed due to its severity, he was immediately put on a respirator. And on October 4th, Florida doctors and officials held a press conference to confirm that, yes, a patient in their hospital has anthrax, but is believed to be in an isolated case. In fact, it was the Health and Human Service directors who told reporters that it's not contagious, it was not a form of terrorism, which people, especially at this point in time, were genuinely very concerned of, and no doubt they should be. It's a horrifying thing to think there's just another thing that they'll have to deal with. So they had suggested that maybe he went hiking and had drank some water from a stream when traveling in California just a few weeks prior. Now, like I said earlier, that would make sense due to it usually being contracted from wild game or live animals. You know that wasn't the case, right? We'll get there. Some people believe that he was actually purposefully being quite deceptive, or maybe just wildly misinformed, especially since the sample that was taken from Bob ended up being a confirmed strain of the Ames strain. Yeah. So this strain is actually a laboratory strain that had been developed by the US Army as a vaccine challenge strain. So this was not some random anthrax that could be found in nature. It could not be contracted from drinking water from a stream. And the fact that the director of human health is saying that all of this was just a one-off is dumb. I get why people thought this was dumb. FBI agents later said that hearing the strain of anthrax that it was very chilling for them, and they instantly knew that this had to be something else, something more. So very shortly after, Ernest Blanco had contracted anthrax, whom was with Bob Stevens at the time, and became terribly ill. Really knew the time of day, and said that he was quite certain that he was going to die. However, at the time, doctors didn't realize he had anthrax. They were actually just treating him for pneumonia. But on October 5th, just a mere lobby vendor who'd opened it was fine. And oddly enough, upon testing, the floor that they were on was actually considered to be the least infected floor of the entire building. But it's very clear that the letter they received, addressed as some precious little love letter moments, was very clearly a hoax and a diversion because, of course, looking back, they won't remember anything else suspicious. The only thing that will pop into their minds is the significant powder that was on that one envelope with the weird objects inside, right? How uncomfortably smart are they? So let's continue because, as I said, large web to go through. So before all of this happened, on September 22nd, an employee at the New York Post had gotten a blister on her finger, and she later tested positive for anthrax. With this, 6 others had actually gotten sick from anthrax as well. On September 26th, 27th, 28th, and October 1st. And this even included the assistant on NBC News to anchor Tom Borka. You know, maybe this will be a stick of mine where I just never get the names right. So none of these actual cases were seen as anthrax at the time when they were reported. However, as time went on, and as I'm sure the press conference had shown, it had definitely woken up a few people. It was only days after Bob Stevens' death that these cases were properly diagnosed later on, as these people were still very sick, especially because Bobby Stevens was actually the first person to die from anthrax in the US since 1976, so a very, very uncommon threat. Within this time frame, there ended up being 22 people who were sick with anthrax in 2001. 5 of them whom had died, and all of the people whom had passed had inhalation anthrax. So there's a lot of difficulties around these scenarios. You have, over time, many media outlet personnel suddenly with anthrax, and soon on October 14th, the FBI confirmed something incredibly suspicious, which is good when you think about it. At least they have a lead. Michael Irish is the editor of the Florida Sun, which we've talked about a little bit before. Upon investigating everyone that worked within the areas who'd been contracted with anthrax, it turned out that Michael and his wife Gloria Irish had been renting an apartment to 2 of the 9/11 hijackers. Pretty crazy coincidence, right? Well, it actually was a coincidence, but during the stages of investigation, the FBI were incredibly certain that Al-Qaeda had been involved. You have the editor of The Sun, whose employees were getting sick and dying from anthrax, whom was renting to 2 people whom happened to be a part of the 9/11 attacks. That is insane. Gloria and Mike, which, wow, as you can imagine at this time, were hounded and definitely had a difficult time. They said that going through what they had to after 9/11 was actually far worse, as they'd suffered severe scrutiny from their friends and family, and I can absolutely imagine. On being interviewed by the FBI, they had talked a bit about the personalities of the 2 renters, which were Marwan and Hamza. So they had said that Marwan was very nice, always smiling, and very considerate. But Hamza was weird, in their opinion. They said that he didn't know English, but the 2 were in the area to take flying lessons to become pilots. Upon remembering, Gloria realized that though Hamza claimed to not know English, when she would be chatting with Marwan, he'd never need to translate. So he'd totally just stand there, understand what she was saying, talk to his friends who would say it back. I know some people who can't speak it, but anyway, he's a terrorist. Actually, and thinking of it that way, that's very creepy because, yeah, I hate that. So the terrorist group is definitely where the FBI had their sights, especially since 15 of the 19 hijackers actually lived in Florida, and most only just a few miles away from the Sun publishing building. So very odd coincidence, and the letters definitely made this seem like a possibility. So let's discuss the letters. So the letters came in two waves. The first set of Anthrax letters had Trenton, New Jersey postmark dated from September 18th. So 5 of these went to ABC News, CBS, NBC, and the New York Post, all in New York City, and as well as to the National Enquirer at American Media in Florida. But what's interesting is only the letters to the New York Post and NBC were found. The existence of the others is inferred because individuals had become infected within those areas, but the letters were not found. And I'm going to tell you, if you saw or held one of these letters after 9/11, you would remember 2 more letters were also postmarked from Trenton, dated October 8th, 3 weeks after the first wave of mailing. And these were addressed to 2 Democratic senators from South Dakota and from Vermont. On October 15th, an aide had opened the Vermont letter, and the government mail service was shut down. So, as I mentioned before, the letters themselves had made it seem like this was definitely a terrorist involvement with Al-Qaeda. All of the letters had shown the sender as a 4th grade class of Greendale School in New Jersey. Almost all of the letters that had been confirmed to be a point of contact for people contracting anthrax had said this on the inside: 09/11/01. You cannot stop us. We have this anthrax. You die now. Are you afraid? Death to America. Death to Israel. Allah is great. So some were saying things like, take penicillin now, with everything else kind of the same lines. Death to America, all of that. And a lot of these letters were actually copies made from a machine, but they were all hand cut to be uneven. It's very odd. So Gloria and Mike at renting to these people did truly end up just being a terrible coincidence. Ended up being a lead that led nowhere, which unfortunately is going to be a lot of this case for quite a bit of time. But the good thing is, the South Dakota letter that was open, did I say Vermont earlier? I was wrong. And the mail services being shut down meant that the other letter to the senator was out there and impounded. So more potent than the first anthrax letters, the material offices weren't really shut down, things are still going. You could easily be exposed and potentially contract anthrax by the simplest of terms. It's actually quite scary, and a lot of people were incredibly uncomfortable collecting their things at the time, no doubt. And as I mentioned, the reason the false leads were so difficult is there were several copycats. People are sick, and hoax letters were mailed from St. Petersburg, Florida, were thought to be anthrax letters or related to them. A letter to Microsoft offices in Reno, Nevada, who knows? False positive test for anthrax, so that just causes even more panic. Later, it had actually been discovered that the letter that had the false anthrax test was sent from Malaysia. Marilyn Thompson of the Washington Post had connected the letter to a Stephen Hatfill, whose girlfriend was from Malaysia. And Stephen Hatfill was a scientist who worked in the government's biodefense labs at Fort Derrick. So, pretty suspicious, honestly. And once terrorist association was kind of gone and ruled out, a lot of people had really thought that this was an inside job. So, you have this scientist who works in biodefense. Maybe he's definitely involved. Why wouldn't people think that? It turns out that the letter sent from Malaysia in question actually had just a check and pornography in it. So, yeah. And then to make things more confusing for investigators, just before the anthrax letters were discovered, someone had sent a letter to authorities stating Doctor was a potential biomedical terrorist, and the FBI had their work cut out for him. Honestly, they just had to go through so many avenues of trash, and I'll be honest with you, when researching this, there was so many little details that were irrelevant. I am not including them all in here, just the main facts that you'll need to see, and of course a few of the trash. So, there was actually a task force that was developed called the Anthrax Task Force, which had roughly 25 to 30 full-time investigators from the FBI, U.S. Postal Inspection Service, and other law agencies, as well as the Justice Department of Counterterrorism section, that had spent hundreds and thousands of investigative hours just trying to find out this case. Honestly, it was crazy. This case ended up taking years to unfold, and within the first year, actually, Don Foster, an English professor at Vassar College, connected the hoax letters to the same Stephen Hatfill I mentioned before. How odd, right? Stephen actually had ended up suing and was later exonerated after Don Foster had published his beliefs in Vanity Fair and Reader's Digest, and he won a whopping $5.8 million in 2008. Don't accuse people. Cancel culture, but 2001 version. There's his apology video. Doesn't need one. Just sues and gets 5.8 mil. Love that. So, don't worry. We're getting at things. We're getting to the meat and potatoes. After June of 2002, when FBI agents genuinely did consider Stephen Hatfill a person of interest and had searched his residence, there were no further anthrax letters sent. The Bentwood Postal Facility reopened in Washington, D.C. People could get their things, yay. However, there was more than $130 million worth of renovation and cleanup. A lot. Probably a lot of job opportunities at the time, I'm assuming, but I doubt anyone wanted to risk that. Probably not a good time to be a mailman. Probably not. So then, nothing really came of anything for a long time, actually. From 2004 to 2008, it's very much virtual silence other than the Stephen Hatfill drama that was unfolding. The lawsuit that he filed against New York Times for defamation, suing the Justice Department. But there's a lot of behind-the-scenes work going on. A lot of people started attacking the FBI, saying they were dragging their feet, saying that this was clearly a rogue agent out there, that there had been no prime suspect. So, does the FBI even really do anything? Well, they do. Okay, maybe they don't. The FBI had actually been zeroing in on another suspect, another scientist, in fact, was a top biodefense researcher. He'd suffered from mental health issues for quite a while, telling his mental health counselors more than a year before the attacks that he was interested in a young woman out of town and that he'd mixed up some poison for her that he took on their date. And he was going to be watching a soccer match that she was playing in, and if she lost, he'd poison her. But luckily she didn't. Luckily, she didn't. The greatest date ever. Now, he did seek help from a counselor quite a few times in the mid-2000s, and his counselors said that he was a skillful scientist who knew how to do things without people finding out. Great thing to say about someone who's a suspect. They were also concerned at his emotionless description of a specific homicidal plan that the counselor then alerted psychiatrists of, as well as the police department. In 2008, Bruce told a different therapist that he had planned to kill all of his co-workers and go out with a bang. I think the FBI finally was kind of onto something, right? According to the reports of the Anthrax investigation published by the Department of Justice, Ivan's engaged in actions. I'm going to be reading a lot here. Hi. Ivan's engaged in actions and made statements that indicated of a consciousness of guilt. He took environmental samples in his laboratory without authorization and into decontaminated areas in which he'd worked without reporting his activities. He also threw away a book about secret codes, which actually described methods similar to those used in the anthrax letters. And Ivan's threatened other scientists. He'd made really weird statements about his possible involvement in a conversation with an acquaintance and put together outlandish theories together in an effort to shift the blames of the anthrax mailings to people close to him. If you're not guilty, you don't really need to shift any blame. So, what? The FBI had said that Ivan's justifications for his actions after the environmental sampling, as well as his explanation for his samplings, really just contradicted each other. He wasn't making any sense. Much like reading a lot of this online didn't make any sense to me. Now, here's some sciencey stuff for you. According to the Department of Justice, flask RMR-1029 and the RMR-1029 was actually the identical genetically unique materials used in the attacks, which was created and controlled by Ivan during testings. As you know, he was vastly involved in the anthrax community, apparently, and the FBI had said that this is what they believed was used to create the murder weapon that was mailed out to everyone. Later in June of 2008, when Ivan was involuntarily committed into a psychiatric hospital, the FBI had stated during a June 5th group therapy session, Ivan had had a conversation with an unnamed witness during which he made a series of crazy statements about the anthrax mailings that the FBI said could be characterized as non-denial denials. When asked if the anthrax attacks could have anything to do with them, the FBI said Ivan's admitted he suffered from memory loss, stating that he would wake up dressed and wondered if he'd gone out during the night. And some of his responses allegedly included in the following sentence, quote, "I can tell you that I don't have it in my heart to kill anybody. I do not have any recollections of ever doing anything like that. As a matter of fact, I don't have a clue how to make a bioweapon, and I don't want to know. If I found out I was involved in some way and kind of suspicious one, I wouldn't think myself to be vicious or a nasty, evil person. I don't like to hurt people accidentally in any way, and including insert coworkers' names. Wouldn't do that mentioned a lot, obviously. Bruce Ivan's life had major difficulties. He was suffering a lot. He had had a lot of demons and underlying issues that he had never gotten appropriate help for. And he had actually died on the 27th of July in 2008. When he was found, he was unconscious in his home. He'd appeared to have died from an overdose of Tylenol with codeine in an apparent suicide. Oddly enough, though, there was no autopsy performed because apparently the state medical examiner said that it wasn't necessary based on the blood test results that it came back. However, a summary was released later saying that his death was from liver and kidney failure after taking 2 bottles of Tylenol PM containing diphenhydramine. I can't talk this video. I can't talk. But this does contradict what they had stated about codeine being found in his blood, so very suspicious. Yeah, the FBI had actually later did something kind of weird for them in August of 2008 after Bruce's death. They'd made a public statement to everyone of all of the evidence that they'd had against him, which, is weird, kind of for the whole innocent until proven guilty thing. But it was a big public interest piece, and a lot of people honestly wanted to feel safe. I think that they wanted to know that there were moving pieces going, that things were at least trying to be resolved. And the FBI did think that they could prove guilt towards reasonable doubt with their evidence. And their evidence was that they were able to identify the genetically unique material of the anthrax used in the mailings from the specific flask that Bruce had. And everyone that had used it was actually ruled out except for Bruce. Also, a specific machine called the Lopez. I may be saying that wrong, like I do today. I always look up before, and I did for these. Just not my day, I guess. But this machine dries pathogens and anthrax. And this machine was in Bruce's lab and could only be used by Bruce or with his approval specifically. And his co-workers had said that he would often be there alone working off of this equipment at night or on the weekends. And whenever asked of what he was working on, he never had any answers for them. He'd then made threatening emails to others about the case and tried to throw people off with weird samples, as well as other strange behaviors that he had had prior to and after the events had occurred. And actually, when they had raided Bruce's home, while investigating him, there was 68 unsent letters in his home addressed to Congress and media outlets. He was known in his adult years for sending weird packages under false names. His statements, while interviewed by the FBI, were also always very inconsistent, and he was always riddled with such an insane guilt, which was very suspicious to them. Although the flasks were the same genetic materials, however, and unique form of spores, turns out that it had a completely different silicone fingerprint than the actual spores in the attacks. In February of 2010, so 9 years later, the FBI had closed its investigation, issuing a 92-page report that concluded that Bruce Ivins carried out the attacks entirely on his own. But guess what? Yeah, there's another rock in this. The results of the investigation were later called into question by the National Academy of Sciences, which issued a study in 2011 determining that while the scientific evidence supports the idea that Ivins might have been the perpetrator, it does not prove it conclusively. In the wake of this study, a 2014 report by the Government Accountability Office, GAO, found that the scientific methods, including genetic data, terrorist groups. A lot of people think that there's someone out there who is sitting back and laughing and had gotten away with something so crazy. And it is still a mystery, and it probably still will be for quite a while. But either way, it's quite worrisome, because even after all of the precautions were put in place, prepared or not, the threat of another biological attack still remains very real, since in late September of 2018, letters were mailed to the Pentagon that reportedly contained ricin, which is a poison extracted from castor beans that have been used in previous bioterrorist attacks. So, who exactly had done this? It's a great mystery. Probably terrorists, but I don't know. What do you guys think? Honestly, Jennifer, thank you so much for the story. I hope I did it justice. I don't know why I couldn't talk or say or pronounce things in this video, but I hope at least I kept you entertained, and I hope you got enjoyment of me physically suffering during this, because you know what? Unsolved just frustrate me. I was really hoping, as I'd read, that I would find some sort of clue, like solace, closure, and there was nothing. And yeah, I don't know. I'm excited to see what all of you have in the comments for me, what you guys think had happened. If you think it was Al-Qaeda, Qaeda. Also, if you guys remember this going on, leave a comment below on what you recall was going on at that time. I can't even imagine. I vaguely remember this, but it was obviously Canadian, overclouded by the previous events. So, you know, I would be very interested to see your guys' inputs on everything from today's video. So please leave a comment below for me. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. Please like and subscribe to my channel if you enjoy listening to true crime ASMRs. I put out new videos every week, usually Wednesdays, sometimes Thursdays. And I know a lot of you watched my Jeffrey Epstein video, and since